The first time I saw my own signature on a document I had never signed, I felt the ground shift beneath me. It was a property transfer paper. Official. Stamped. Filed. And at the bottom was my name. Signed. Perfectly. Too perfectly. I stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Because it looked exactly like my signature. Every curve, every line. But I knew one thing for sure. I had never signed that document. "Are you sure this isn't yours?" the clerk asked, glancing between me and the paper. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "This is not my signature." But even as I said it, it sounded unbelievable. Because the signature looked real, convincing, almost identical, which meant only one thing. Someone hadn't just forged it, they had studied it, practiced it, copied it carefully. And that made it worse. Because this wasn't random. This was planned. And as I looked at the rest of the document, I realized something even more terrifying. Whoever did this was trying to take something that legally belonged to me. But what they didn't know yet was that one small detail they overlooked was about to expose everything. I asked the clerk to show me the full document. My hands were steady, but inside everything felt off. "This was filed last week," he said. Last week? I wasn't even in the city last week. I scanned the page again. Property details, legal terms, witness section. And then I saw it. The notary stamp. Official. Signed and verified. Which meant one thing. Someone had gone through a notary to make this look legitimate. That wasn't just risky. That was bold. "Who brought this in?" I asked. The clerk checked the system. "It was submitted by a representative," he replied. "On your behalf." On my behalf, I almost laughed. Because whoever did this didn't just forge my signature. They pretended to be connected to me. Authorized. Trusted. I leaned closer to the document. "If this was notarized," I said slowly, "then someone had to confirm my identity, right?" The clerk nodded. "Yes, the notary verifies the person signing." I looked up at him. "Then that's where this falls apart." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" I straightened up. I said, whoever signed this wasn't me. And if the notary did their job correctly, they would remember that. I didn't waste any time. The address of the notary office was printed right there on the document. Within an hour, I was standing outside it. Small office, quiet street. Nothing unusual. But inside, there had to be answers. I walked in and approached the desk. "Hi," I said calmly. "I need to ask about a document that was notarized here last week." The notary looked up. Professional. Neutral. "Do you have the document?" he asked. I placed it in front of him. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. At first, his expression didn't change. But then, something shifted. His eyes paused on the signature. Then moved to my name. Then slowly, he looked up at me. And for a moment, he just stared. Like he was trying to match something in his memory. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up the document again, studied it more closely, then looked back at me. "This," he said slowly, "was signed in front of me." My heart dropped. Because if that was true, then something much bigger was happening. But then he added something else. Something that changed everything. "But you weren't the one who signed it." I felt my heart beat slow, not from relief, but from clarity. "So you remember?" I asked. The notary nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, because something about it felt off. He turned the document toward himself again. "The person who signed this presented identification," he continued. Everything looked valid at first glance. At first glance? I repeated. He nodded. I see a lot of people every day, he said. But I also rely on instinct. He tapped the paper lightly. The signature was too careful. Too careful. That caught my attention. What do you mean? I asked. Real signatures have rhythm, he explained. Natural flow. Small inconsistencies. He looked directly at me. This one looked practiced. My stomach tightened. Because that meant exactly what I feared. Someone had studied my signature long enough to copy it convincingly. But that's not what made me remember, he added. What did? I asked. He leaned back slightly. The person avoided eye contact, he said, and when I asked simple questions, they answered too quickly, like they were rehearsed. A pause. Then he said something that made everything clearer. I noted it in my log. A log. Written evidence. Which meant this wasn't just memory anymore. This was proof, and suddenly, the person who thought they had done everything perfectly had made a critical mistake. Can I see the log? I asked immediately. The notary hesitated for a second, then nodded double quotes yes, he said. Give me a moment. He walked toward a cabinet behind his desk and pulled out a thick register. Pages filled with names, dates, signatures, and notes. He flipped through it carefully, stopping at a page. This is the entry, he said. He turned the book toward me. I leaned in. There it was, my name, the date, and next to it, a short handwritten note. He looked at me seriously. Yes, he said. If this goes further, I'll testify to what I observed. Testify. That word changed everything, because now, this wasn't just my word against someone else's. There was a witness, an official one. And whoever thought they had fooled the system had just been exposed by the one person they couldn't avoid. And just as expected, they denied everything. This transfer was done with full consent, the lawyer claimed. Consent. That word again, it sounded clean, legal, convincing. But it wasn't true, because consent requires presence. And I was never there. The case moved forward quickly, and soon, we were standing in court, not as strangers, but as people who once trusted each other, and now, everything was about to be exposed. The courtroom was quiet, tense, focused. Their lawyer spoke first, confident, controlled. The document is valid, he said. It was signed and notarized properly. I watched carefully, because everything they were saying depended on one assumption, that the signature was mine. Then my lawyer stood up. We would like to call the notary, he said. The room shifted slightly, because that changed everything. The notary walked in calmly, took his place. He didn't need to ask, because now we both understood. This wasn't random, this wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. And the person behind it thought they had covered every detail, except one, the notary, who remembered everything. My lawyer didn't waste any time. We're filing a case, he said. Immediately, within hours, the process had started. A formal complaint, forgery, fraud, illegal property transfer. Everything was documented, everything was backed by evidence. But the most important part was the notary's statement, because without that, it would have been my word against theirs. Days later, the other side responded. My signature samples, and access I had given. Without thinking twice, my lawyer noticed the hesitation on my face. You know who it might be, he said quietly. I didn't answer, because saying it out loud would make it real. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the property record. The name listed as the new beneficiary was already there. Clear. Unavoidable. I placed it on the table. My lawyer looked at it, then back at me. I nodded slowly. I just want to stop this before anything else happens. He shook his head. This has already gone far enough, he said. Then he tapped the document. Who benefits from this transfer? That question hit me instantly. Because I already knew the answer. There was only one person who stood to gain from this. One person who knew my signature. One person who had access to my documents. And suddenly, this stopped being about a stranger. It became something much worse. Because the person behind this was someone I trusted. I didn't want to believe it. Even after my lawyer asked that question, I tried to think of other possibilities. Maybe it was identity theft. Maybe someone found my documents somewhere. Maybe it was just coincidence. But deep down, I already knew. There was only one person who had everything they needed. My documents. My details. ID presented. Hesitation during verification. Signature unusually slow. My chest tightened. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was documented concern. Do you have a copy of the ID they showed you? I asked. He shook his head. No, but I verified it at the time, he said. It matched your name. Matched my name, not my identity. There was a difference. Would you be willing to confirm this officially? I asked. They assumed no one would remember, but the notary did. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Not a long argument. Not a complicated case. Just one person who knows the truth. Because no matter how perfect a lie looks, it only takes one detail to break it. Exposed. Recognition. The one detail they thought would protect them became the reason they were exposed. When it was over, I walked out of the courtroom slowly. Not relieved. Not angry. Just aware. Aware of how close everything came to being lost. That they made one mistake. There was no recovering from that. No explanation that could fix it. No argument strong enough to reverse it. The judge reviewed the documents again. Forgery of a notarized document is a serious offense, he said. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to say. My lawyer remained calm. Because the case was already decided. The truth had been proven. Not through emotion. Not through accusation. But through one simple thing. The authority in his voice was final. The notary continued calmly. The signature matches the name, but not the person. That one sentence changed the entire case. Because now, it wasn't just doubt. It was confirmation. And the person who thought they had fooled everyone had just been identified. I turned in the same direction. The person sitting there froze. Because in that moment, everything collapsed. That's the individual who signed the document, the notary said clearly, and looked straight ahead. Do you recognize this document? My lawyer asked. Yes, he said. Was it signed in front of you? Yes. A pause. Then the question that mattered most. Is the person who signed it present in this courtroom today? The notary didn't hesitate. Yes. Everyone looked around. Then my lawyer asked one final question. Can you point to them? The truth had nowhere left to hide. I left the notary's office with something I didn't have before. Proof. Not just suspicion. Not just instinct. Real, documented proof. The next step was obvious. I went straight to a lawyer. He reviewed everything carefully, the document, the forged signature, the notary's notes. At first, he was silent. Then he leaned back and said, "This is serious." "How serious?" I asked. He looked directly at me. Forgery of a notarized document, especially for property, is not a small issue.